Hello and welcome to this edition of NBU LitFest, which is presented by Bookbank. This is our second last event, so you can catch up on conversations that we've been having these past 3 days using the hashtag NBU LitFest. But first, my name is Angela Washuka and I'm a founder at Bookbanktrust, and this festival is anchored in Nairobi's public libraries and is also a celebration of the Macmillan Memorial Library's 90th year. If all of this sounds new to you, please visit bookbank.org to explore our grand vision for public libraries. But for now, some house rules. Please keep your mics muted for the duration of the event. This is also a pre-recorded session. It will feature a Q&A session at the end of the discussion. So please feel free to utilize the Q&A button on your screen so that we can answer your questions at the end. We're also streaming on Facebook Live. So if you're catching this conversation from there, karibu sana. And speaking of which, we're quite social. You can connect with us on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, and on LinkedIn. Our handle is @thebookbank, and the hashtag that we're using again is NBU LitFest. We'd also love to hear your feedback. So there'll be polls popping up on your screen at various points during this discussion. There's likely one on your screen now asking you how you got here. We'd love to hear it. Please send us your feedback. I am going to be handing over to Christine Mungai in a little bit, but before I do, I would like to thank the people that made this event possible. Our funders, Sharjah World Book Capital in Sharjah, Sigrid Rousing Trust in London, the Embassy of the Netherlands in Nairobi, and of course our programming partners, British Council, Paukwa, Glasgow Women's Library, Baraza Media Lab, and finally, but not least, Sahifa Jano, and with a special shout out to Ngala Chome, who reached out to us about hosting this panel at NBU LitFest. Asante sana Ngala, and you'll be hearing from him in the session shortly. And of course, to all my wonderful colleagues at Bookbank who have worked for months to deliver this festival and made it possible, asanteni sana, and karibu to the conversation. I will now introduce Christine Mungai, who will be in conversation with our panelists this afternoon. Christine is a writer, a journalist, and 2018 Harvard University Nieman Fellow who's based in Nairobi. She's written on a wide range of subjects, and her work has been published in the Africa Report, the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, Al Jazeera, the New Internationalist, and The Elephant, which is a Kenyan publication. She's currently the curator at Baraza Media Lab in Nairobi, and Baraza Media Lab is a co-creation space for public interest storytelling, and she'll be moderating this conversation. Karibuni sana to the conversation. Without much further ado, over to you, Christine.
Welcome to this session. My name is Christine Mungai. I'm a writer and journalist. I started my career in writing and journalism more than 10 years ago. And now I'm the curator of Baraza Media Lab. We are a co-creation space in Nairobi, focused on strengthening the Kenyan media ecosystem, and in particular, public interest storytelling. I'm really, really excited to be moderating this panel, where we get to speak about the intellectual legacies of Binyavanga Wainaina, whom we lost a couple of years ago, but whose impact is something that we are still processing. And I think we're going to be talking about the legacy and the work and the impact that he had on this, not just for writers, but for the creative ecosystem more broadly. And just to start us off, I'd like to ask Dr. Ngala Chome about the particular historical moment that Kwani emerges in. Binavanga was one of the founders of Kwani, a very influential literary journal and really writing moment or a literary community, right? Whose impact in Kenya's kind of literary imagination and creative space at that time was really like a bolt out of the blue, right? That kind of just changed so much at that time. I want to ask Dr. Chome, why does Kwani emerge in the moment that it does? Because I believe that in any country's history, any number of things can happen, but when things actually do happen, I like to understand, why does it happen at that time and not at any other time when it was possible to happen? As a historian, I know that you have thought deeply about these questions, about particular moments in Kenya's history that shape the trajectory going forward. And I'd like you to place Kwani and Binavanga in that moment in the early 2000s.
Thank you, Christine. Well, I'd like to start off by saying that many other things were also happening during the early 2000s in Kenya. And I guess the most obvious one, of course, was the culmination, if you like, of the first proper outcome of the return to multi-party politics in Kenya, right? So this is the coming to an end of the Moi regime of KANU, and the ushering in of a new age of hope. It is always cited, this poll, where Kenyans were polled to be the most, hopeful or enthusiastic people in
optimistic.
The world. Optimistic people in the world. It was during that time, and of course, for me, actually, it wasn't even like the emergence of Kwani growing up at that time that was quite telling of what was happening in the country. For me, it was the music that also kind of emerged during that time. I'm talking about from the years of 2001, 2002, 2003, the emergence of Ogopa DJs, of Caliph Records. For many young Kenyans of my generation, this was very fundamental to kind of shaping our cultural experiences during that time. But then also there's a question of why is it also happening during that time? And it's simply like there was an air of liberation in Kenya. There was an air of hope, and it's percolated through many areas of sort of cultural, intellectual expression, Kwani being one of them. In fact, I remember Binyavanga himself telling me that one of his, biggest inspirations was Ukoflani Momao, in sort of thinking about setting up Kwani, for example. So I like to give, to look at these events in this kind of interrelated manner, because we also sometimes think in silos, and Binyavanga for me was one of those people who never thought like that about cultural expression, about intellectual work. He always saw a connection between what he did as a writer, but also later as an activist, with what musicians and painters were also doing. He always had this kind of what you might call multidisciplinary view of the work of thinking or of intellectual labor. So, but then again, there is also kind of a very specific literary history as well, in which you could place Kwani, in which you could place Binyavanga, which is also important, when you're thinking about this time. So we're also moving then from a place of the sort of high school, university-based literature or writing, to a writing that is outside of the university system, that is also, but that is also seeking to stage its legitimacy within public intellectual life in Kenya, but not following what the university or the system had decided was going to be the proper literary canon. So there's also like a debate about literary canon in which Binyavanga was inserting himself into. And I think this then later shows up in his writing of How to Write About Africa, that we cannot continue to write the same stories about our continent and about our country. This was also one of the kind of things that begin to inform what then becomes the literary agenda behind Kwani, and which Binyavanga was very critical of informing. But I guess for me that I'll stop there in terms of trying to contextualize Binyavanga and Kwani within so many kind of developments that were happening at the same time, but that were also related. I think for me that it is important to kind of look at this in this sort of multidisciplinary manner.
Thank you so much for that. And I just want to pick up from what you've said about creating or developing a canon, right? That at that time, of course, the institutions that were gatekeeping were very, very quick to dismiss this whole new Kenyan writing situation going on. But for me, let me just speak about myself as a millennial. Coming at the time when Kwani emerged, when I became aware of Kwani, it was at a very particular moment in my life. I think if I was 5 years younger or 5 years older, it wouldn't have had the impact that it had in my life at that moment, because I was in that phase in your early 20s, very early 20s, when you're making decisions about your life that shape the trajectory of your life. Small decisions just kind of shape what opens up for you in the future and the kind of things that it closes for you in the future. And so for me at that time, I was in university, I was studying a science degree as I was okay studying biomedical science. I was doing reasonably well. But whenever a Kwani journal would be published, I cannot explain to you how earth-shattering it was for me to have this journal in my hands. First of all, I would pay for it with my own money, like my help money. I would forgo food as a university student to pay money for this thing. And I would read it over and over and over again. We would pass it around in my group of friends. We would discuss it. We were just like shocked that this was even happening. Yeah. Because what we knew to be Kenyan writing was the product of these gatekeeping institutions, and it was nothing like what we were seeing. And so this little seed in my mind was planted that, wow, Kenya has writers. What if I was a writer? and that's where the story of me becoming a writer, it's completely directly linked to Kwani. If Kwani did not exist, I don't think I would even have had the thought. It wouldn't have come to my mind. Like that idea, I don't think would have come to my mind. So when you talk about a canon, I just want, maybe I want to bring Kiprop in now to talk about this idea of how much that writing that emerged at that time shaped what it means to be a writer for the next maybe 15, I would say up to 20 years now. Kiprop, I don't know if you see, if you have had that kind of experience, like what your own journey into writing was like, if it intersected at all with the existence of Kwani in our world, and if you see that legacy of them, Kwani as a journal, as a space, as a creative community, setting the stage for what Kenyan writing is today.
Well, I agree with you, because writing doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's a solitary act or a solitary pursuit, but you need a kind of structure around it for production to happen, for it to become a shared reality. And Kwani was essential for that. Like all these little writings that people were doing privately, we had to find a way of bringing them together and making a conversation about them, editing them, producing them into books. And just like you, I had the same experience completely, because I would not have become the writer I was today if it was not for Binyavanga and his writing, and if it was not for Kwani, because I think what it did to me by reading those stories, I realized that we have a very specific history, a very specific way of looking at the world, very specific ideas, and those ideas matter. Because sometimes you read narratives or things written by the West, or you watch movies about the West, and Africa or your country is depicted in a certain way. And before Kwani, like maybe you didn't, personally, I didn't feel like it's something that I could push back, or those feelings of resistance that I had mattered, and I could articulate them, and I could actually specify my own outlook and say, this is what I see, these are the stories I want to tell. So I like Kwani for organizing that. Like, it actually resisted previous narratives by the West about us being some kind of collapsed people in a collapsed state with collapsed lives. But we are actually vibrant. We have our stories to tell. We have our dreams. We have our hopes to actually organize for us to tell those stories and for us to resist the narratives that were previously told. So I think it was essential for that to happen, for even me to be comfortable enough to try out the many stories that I'm trying out now. Yes.
Kiprop, I just want to say that recently I was rereading one of your articles, the one that you wrote about your hometown, Kapsio, in Popular Magazine. And one of the things that I love so much about your writing, and really the writing of all of us here on this panel, I am a fan of all of you, by the way, is how delightful it is to read a Kenyan writer whose eyes are open, like they can actually see what the world that they're living in and put words to it, right? I think before Kwani came into my world, I really did not have the words to capture the life that I was living. It's strange that we were just living, we were okay. But for those of us for whom words are kind of so important, the only way that you get those words is when you have an example. Some of the writing that I think for me is so influential, and for me traces back to Binavanga, is really simple writing that just describes what we are seeing and how we are living, right? That it's actually worth documenting, you know? Your story of Kapsio really just showed like everything that is in our environment is worth writing about. It's worth talking about. Like it's worthy of being a subject, right? And I don't know if you feel the same about how we as writers actually find words to describe what we are seeing. Sometimes the words help us see, and other times seeing is what creates the words. And so I just want you to kind of explore that and place your own writing in that perspective, really just to extend from what you have just come from starting to talk about, that where we are and the environment that we are in is actually worth writing about.
Okay, yes. So I wrote about Kapsio, which is the village that I grew up in Elgeyo Marakwet County, and it was just renowned for all kinds of vices. Like it was a busa hotspot of sorts in Elgeyo Marakwet. And I think, like, when I look back at my childhood or growing up in Elgeyo Marakwet, the things that I love about that county, about those people, or like the things that I miss about being home, are not the things that are detailed about my home when I go online. Like when you read about Elgeyo Marakwet, you'll be told, oh, semi-arid area. You'll be told about maybe illiteracy level, or you'll be told about all these things that people, cattle rustling, for example. But I don't sit and think about those things. Like even when I'm home with people, we are not like, oh, there's a lot of malaria. Like that's not the conversation that we're having. We're having so many other wonderful, beautiful conversations about our lives, about what we want, about what we hope for the future. And I think those other narratives about Africa that were kind of like the pre-existing narrative is like all those other things that Africans care about don't really matter. what is at center is the turmoil. All these issues in their lives that need to be fixed, whether it's through in education, in healthcare, in whatnot. Very important things. I'm not saying like they need to be pushed away, but it kind of, if that is repeated over and over again, it kind of narrows your life to the point where you feel like other ideas about your life and your community don't matter anymore. You narrow your imagination of yourself and the imaginations of your communities. And just to go back to Kwani, I think it took Kwani to allow me to discard that. So even when I wrote that story about Capsio, I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't make it like it was a very wonderful experience growing there, but I wrote about the beauty of the place, like waking up in the morning and going through some forested land and seeing all these animals rushing about, or about the interesting people I met. Like there was this old woman who would walk by with a multitude of dogs. I think every dog in the village was very close to her and it really loved her. So it didn't matter where she was passing. All dogs would just collect and follow her as she walked. And I thought that's very interesting. And that story in itself is worth being told besides all the other narratives that can be told about a specific place in our continent. So I hope I'm answering your question. Yes, so that's what I have to say.
Thank you so much for that. And you've already talked about this very impactful and influential essay that Binyavanga wrote in Granta magazine in 2005, How to Write About Africa. Ngala has it there in his background.
Well, I tried.
So this essay is one of the most searing. I think we use the word, as writers, we use the word searing a lot, but this was really searing. And you know, I looked it up just a few weeks ago. When I was rereading it, of course, for the 100th time. And I counted the words, and the essay is just 1,373 words. Like, it's just a little thing of the most biting satire that you'll ever read, the most searing essay that you will ever read. And it really, really shapes, not just for us as Africans, but this work really traveled. Like, it traveled outside of Africa to those countries out there which make decisions about what Africa is supposed to be. It is read in colleges all around the world. And so it has had this really, really huge impact. And even last year, with the death of George Floyd and how that triggered globally, so many calls and demands for justice, and especially racial justice, it reemerges again in our consciousness. I saw it being shared and reshared again last year. And so really that was a work that did its work in its time and beyond its time, right? So Ngala, I just want you to tie these threads for us, especially having spent a bit of time in, I guess, intellectual spaces and universities outside of this country, just to talk about like how this essay, what kind of work it has done and it continues to do in these spaces that set agendas and have these kind of conversations that affect our lives here in Africa.
Yeah, I think for the academy, How to Write About Africa, I've always said this, it's almost popularized post-colonial theory. So, I mean, it's important to say that Binyavanga was not the first person to think about this or to have an issue about, you know, representational narratives of Africa. I mean, the debate is as old as, goes back to Conrad and Heart of Darkness. You know, Chinua Achebe also thought about this. You know, post-colonial theorists also were debating and thinking about this and writing about this. But no piece of work had done, as you say, in very, few words, with the kind of global appeal that the essay had. It went viral, actually, is the name, in the way that Binyavanga was able to, to put the matters across. And this is the thing about Binyavanga, even interaction with him personally. Binyavanga was able to, he had this insane ability to simplify the most complex social issues, social phenomena. And me being an academic, almost sometimes feeling ashamed that I wasn't able to even kind of come close to that. And he did that in that essay. And I remember when I was teaching in Durham, when I was, signing up to teach in Durham, How to Write About Africa was the first required reading for undergraduate children in the UK, which is actually interesting because it's not the same. I don't think it's the same in Kenya.
Maybe we should talk about that. Why isn't it required reading in Kenya? Like, who reads How to Write About Africa in an academic setting, like in a formalized setting in Kenya?
I have no idea where. When Shiro went to SIU, I think maybe there, but nope. Yeah. But certainly not the University of Nairobi. And I'm not talking about a literature class. I'm talking about a history class. This is a history class. But this was the first reading. And it's, under here, it's the same at SOAS, for example. It's the same at many other universities. And I think, yes, and I think its power really was not in the originality of its ideas. I think its power was in the simplicity, in the satire, but communicated very cleverly. And as you say, searing essay. I know a bit about the history behind the writing of How to Write About Africa. I think at that time, Binyavanga was doing his MFA in the UK. I think it was the University of East Anglia or something like this. And he came across this magazine, which had in fact, it was an issue on Africa, and he was reading it on the train. And of course, all the things kind of he talks about in the essay, this kind of representation of Africa was kind of puppet across that issue. And How to Write About Africa began life as an email. It was a rant, actually, to that magazine. And in true, I say, white liberal people fashion, is that he was told to write it just so that they can publish it. And this was actually wasn't supposed to be published, supposed to be a critique. And that's how it begins life, actually, as an essay that we now all know about. Anyway, it's a story I was told in a very dingy place. Some facts may have been recalibrated. Yes, yeah.
At this point, I want to bring in Wanjiru Koinange. Shiro, I'm so excited to be on this panel with you, and I want to kind of steer this ship and shift it a bit, and talk about something that I know is quite difficult to articulate, which is this idea that I think all of us on this panel are grappling with, which is the legacy, the impact of Binyavanga's work, ideas, the things that he seeded, the communities that he was a part with, on some level are bigger than the man, bigger than Binyavanga himself, the individual, right? And so I don't want this conversation to be kind of hagiographic, right? Where it's all about, painting him in this particular light that cannot quite separate the legacy and the person, right? I want you to speak to that, because your novel, The Havoc of Choice, which we talked about last year when it came out, one of the things that your novel explores is basically the frailty and the humanity of people who want to do good, and the kind of ripple effects and unintended consequences that sometimes it opens up, right? For me, that was the biggest takeaway from your book, that the points in the novel which really gripped me were not the ones it was the ones where the unintended consequences were really just wrapped up in something really good, right? People trying to make a difference, but the impact is quite, the way it travels and how it affects people is quite different. I want you to speak, to kind of place Binavanga in that kind of context, right? Where the person and the work that he was doing are filtered through this thing called the human experience, and how you see him in that light.
That's a really great question. Thank you. As you were talking, I was thinking about how limited the human experience is as a channel to carry all of the things that we must experience as creatives, as academics, as whatever we're trying to do in our cities. And the beautiful thing I think about Binyavanga's legacy and Binyavanga the man is that the consistent call to action to free our imaginations and to live within the uncomfortable bits and the fringes, and to discover your flaws and then sit in them and figure out if they're actually flaws or just a result of people being so focused on what he called the syllabus, right? Which in this case was colonization, and like we don't really like know how to look beyond the imagination, because we've been sure. I mean, we don't know how to look beyond the syllabus, because we've been told and shown that doing that is dangerous, and doing that is rebellious and is reckless. But in his case, doing that meant that his work, his community, his ethos, the person that he was, just did the kind of thing that all of the people on this call are talking about, inspired us to imagine, inspired us to sit within the things that we learn about ourselves when we imagine, and also gave language to it. And for me, that is the most important thing, that this man lived a life that gave language to the things that we were afraid to say because we'd been so socialized against it, right? His biting satire, his desire to question everything is the one thing that I think I hold close to me every day. In our work at Bookbank and in my own writing, I really, really question everything. I'm just like, this has been done a certain way. How can we flip the way that it's done? How can we imagine different? How can we imagine a city where libraries are thriving? How can we imagine a city where writers are making tons of money from their craft? Creatives are making tons of money from their craft. And then when you begin to imagine it and walk towards it, it doesn't feel so difficult. And that's the thing about Kwani, which I kind of discovered very similarly at the same time that you were saying. I was in my early 20s. I had just discovered the intersection between your art and social good and social justice, because those two things, I'm like, you could never live a life fighting for better, for public good. But at this time in my life, I had just started working with Eric Wainaina, who is obviously like one of the beacons of social justice in our country, and watching him do this thing with music that also fed his family, but also then inspired people to move a certain way was jarring. And then I meet Binyavanga and discover Kwani, and I was like, oh my gosh, writers can do this too. It's not just for musicians and rappers and artists. So there's always going to be lots of conversations about the inability to separate the man from his work. And sometimes I question if that's even necessary, because Binyavanga didn't separate who he was from his work. For him, he wore it, and he wanted he was hungry for that authenticity. And he's just like, I can't be authentic if I don't just do the thing that I say. The word in his biography, Kime, is I think one of the most, I keep coming back to Kime, like the rhythm of it, the intention of it, the desire to give language for things that we have been socialized against finding language for. That is one of the legacies that I think will outlive even the people on this call, because it unlocked our imagination.
Yeah.
I really love how you've said it. We've been socialized against finding language.
Yeah,
that's hella powerful. Shiro, before I change course again, I just want to ask you, what happens when our icons don't live up to their own clarion calls for freedom, for imagination, for justice. How do we sit with that, and what do we do next? I know Binavanga too, maybe from like 2013 onwards, right? When you look at his later writing versus his earlier writing, his later positions versus his earlier positions, we can pass that in many different ways, but I would like to ask you like how you pass that. For me, the most generous read that I can give it is that Binavanga was honest, even when he was dead wrong. Yeah. He was still honest, even though he was hella wrong, and he needed to just take a seat, you know. But at the end of it, he was not going to be hypocritical.
Yeah.
You
know, I also wonder, when you asked about what happens when our icons don't meet up to the standards they've created, I thought about my parents first, right? Because for many of us, your parents are one of the first icons that you have. And like, of course, parents will disappoint us, right? And I think that my time on this planet is teaching me is to begin to like understand that these people are icons, and they're great, and they have ideals that we all latch on to for dear life, but they're also human beings. And I knew that moment when, for the first time, I began to wonder, this guy, like, is he sure? Is he sure about these things? But then for me, it's a signal to explore other, right? To just kind of read beyond what you believe and explore potential truths, not because you want to adopt them as your own, but because you want to understand them, you want to know. Writing The Havoc of Choice showed me a lot of those moments when I'm just like, I've been doing this thing the wrong way. I've been using my privilege in the wrong way. And that was a really painful thing to do for somebody who thinks that she's woke, right? And it's still happening now as readers read my book and point things out. I'm just like, you're right, I never thought about that. But if you don't allow ourselves, especially people who are charged with the imagination of their audiences, and I think everyone here is one of those people, if we don't accept that we are allowed to be vulnerable, and publicly so, then I'm pretty sure that success is not that thing that's going to be within your realm, because you have to be vulnerable. You have to be like, my ideas aren't always right. I don't always have all of the answers, but I'm not afraid to fail and fail publicly. And as I say it, I'm just like, I need to take my own advice, but I think it's just the cost of deciding to pick a world where you shape people's realities, even if you won't always do them in the right way. But I think that allowing space for as many perspectives as possible within ourselves and within others is really the first way to go. Question everything. It's a thing that I'm just like, I say all the time. I'm like, this spreadsheet says we should do things a certain way. Is there another way? Is there another way to look at it? Is there another way to be? So I also remind myself of this anytime like someone I deeply love does something, inserts R. Kelly, insert Michael Jackson, all of these people who've just been problematic in the past. You're just like, okay, this is a calling call. And sometimes I think those two examples were really bad ones, because I don't think there's any meant to go outside of that. But sometimes it's an invitation to just explore further, even if it's just for a couple of seasons or a couple of minutes.
Thank you so much. Your answer was so nuanced, and I know that it's and helpful, because this is not something that is, I guess, just specific to Binya or to any one individual, because the time that we're living in, we're in a space right now that forces us to reconsider so many things, and forces us to, in the reconsidering, to take a stand. Like in this kind of public life that we live right now, there's always something to like take a stand about. And sometimes when you take a stand, you're wrong. You're dead wrong. But I think the thing that makes it authentic is when you're honest about it. And more than that, at least for me, is before rushing to take a stand, to think about like how this affects people who don't have the position that you have, the power that you have, the privilege that you have to even declare a stand, right? There are people who, for certain issues, taking a stand is not even an option, because they're already caught on the underside of that thing.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. We are running out of time. I can't believe that we are on our last few minutes. And so I want to invite us all to give our closing comments. And this is how I want us to give our closing comments. Binyavanga's autobiography was titled, "One Day I Will Write About This Place." Here on this panel, we are all writers, thinkers. We grapple with ideas and with stories, all of us in one way or another. I want to ask our panel, starting with Kiprop, then going to Ngala and finishing with Shiro. What's the thing that you want to write about in the place that you're at right now? And what do you think Binavanga would think about that idea? What would he push you to do? Which corners, which stones would he push you to unturn in that idea? If you were to say that you will write about whatever it is that is in your place right now, what idea is that, and how do you think Binavanga would push you to do it well? Kiprop, tough, but I know it's already there. I can see it in your face.
Well, I think there are many realities that need to be tackled and many experiences that also need, okay, not really need, because they don't actually need to be articulated, but my curiosity and my imagination takes me there. And I think it's what Wanjiru said about going to the uncomfortable places, to the fringes, to those places that scare you, where you don't have the words, and then finding the words. Like, don't be a good, I can't remember what Binyavanga said, but in one of his videos, it was like, let the good children come. I can't remember what he said, but let the obedient children come. So I think I want to be a disobedient writer, whatever that should mean. And I cannot say what Binavanga would think about that, because I can't think on his behalf. But yes, I want to be unafraid, disobedient, and to trust my imagination, to go to the very uncomfortable places as I write about this place.
Unafraid and disobedient. I love that.
Love
Ngala,
that.
what would you say about what you would want to write in this place?
I mean, for me, what Binyavanga and the whole Kwani generation meant is that because I come from a very mainstream background, you know, like my start in academia, thinking about very mainstream subjects and topics in Kenyan history, Kenyan politics, but always there are always this kind of holes, right? Like this kind of things that we never really kind of think about, talk about, or we actually don't want to. That I think for me was Kwani's greatest contribution, and encouraged me to think about subjects that would not normally become the center of debate, of intellectual debate, not at the university, but also just kind of in public intellectual discourse. And so since that time, like, you know, even the topic of my PhD, but also, you know, the topic of most of the things that I've published, I'm always looking for the stories that we haven't really understood yet, but are part of us and part of our history. So if it's the story about, I've been obsessed recently with the story of Kenyan's urban contemporary music, for example. That story, I think, is very important, needs to be told. It was those kind of, Binyavanga taught me to think like that about Kenya. And I think this is what I'll continue doing in terms of, you know, well, not just kind of following in his intellectual trajectory, but also because I really feel it's very important. So that's what I would say now.
Shiro, what's one day you'll write about this place? What will you write about, and how would you think that Binyavanga's legacy would feed into that?
I am very much like Kiprop in the sense that I want to free my imagination further. I want to write about sex. I want to write about sex and not intercourse, because that's going to be a really short career. But the pursuit of it, the way that people shape-shift for it, the people who reject it, and how we find it. And so I guess I'm really wanting to write the kind of stories around love and companionship and all the things that are attached to that, that makes us think about our world and our cities and our realities in the same way that The Havoc of Choice did, which is a story about politics and elections and family. But I think it's not really about what's happening in the background. It's about the thing it triggers in your psyche. And as you mentioned, at the point where we're having to question so much more than our parents did, than our grandparents did. And I want to question that a bit more around companionship, romance, love, and to do that in abundance, because one of the things I always remember Binyavanga saying is that he really wants our children to live in a world where they can read, they can write their stories, read their stories, and print their stories, which is a really important part of it. Let's not write the stories and send them out. So let's actually get to a point where we have these wonderful story factories that are just churning out experiences and imagination for all ages. So I want to write a lot about pop and love and all of the things that are not serious enough. And I think Binavanga would love it. I think he would absolutely love it.
I'm going to close with my own ideas of what I'm writing about and how they're connected to some of the ideas that he began to espouse and to write about. I want to write about Pentecostalism and the church. This is something that I've been writing about for a number of years, but I'm still putting it out there because I want to keep committing to actually writing deeply about this, how Pentecostal evangelical Christianity shaped and continues to shape our politics, our society, the kind of options that it gives us and the ones that it forecloses, and how that affects our political imagination. I've been thinking about this for a long time. And I think listening to one of Binyavanga's videos was, I think, the first time I kind of had concrete words to put this idea down and to start thinking about it. I want to close with this.
Before you do,
yes.
Can I just say that you must write about the monkey, the monkey that shut down the electrical grid?
Oh, that's coming.
You should write that story.
Oh, that's coming. That's coming. In the next, not more than 2 months, there will be an essay about the monkey. It's already in progress. The monkey is in progress.
Christine,
yes.
By all means, write that story. But I also want to say something, because everybody spoke very specifically about the kind of writing that they want to do. And I just want to mention that I care so much about lineage and about an African past that you're supposed to forget or not really understand. So one of the things I would do is to delve into the past and write the stories of my great-great-grandparents and great-great-grandmothers in a very real way as we write about our present lives. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Kiprop, you've been doing an incredible job already. I just have to say that. Your writing is amazing. The way you write about the past, the way you write about family and history and lineage and legacy. I don't know how many of us can actually even name back 5 generations, right? At some point, it's it disappears into the ether, right? Yeah. And I think Kiprop, your writing always challenges me that the ancestors were real people, with real stories, aspirations, dreams.
Being in love, having sex.
Exactly.
Being disobedient.
Being disobedient also. I want to close by saying this for possibly our younger audiences. I'm talking about Gen Zs and younger. For many of them, the first time they heard about Binavanga or became aware of him was when he came out as gay, I think in 2014. And so if you're at that age, then what you know about him is in the context of LGBTQ in Kenya and how repressive this country is and how much this country is so hypocritical to clamp down on love, diversity, and authentic living, and yet it opens up all kinds of other vices that no one ever talks about, right? And Binavanga was very clued into this kind of like hypocrisy that we have in this country. However, Bina's life as a figure did not start with that announcement, right? He was doing so much work before and after. And I hope that in the few minutes that we have talked about him in this panel, we've been able to place him in that context, and even his coming out in that context, that Binya was committed to free living and being an authentic human being in a very oppressive country. Thank you so much for making the time to be here, for sharing your insights. Thank you, Ngala. Thank you, Kiprop. Thank you, Wanjiru. This conversation is part of NBO LitFest, and it exists as a series of other activities and other conversations that I am so excited to be a part of. And so I look forward to the next time that we will, I hope that this will happen again, that the LitFest will be a regular annual thing. I think this city really needs those kind of events again.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Hopefully, fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
Yes.
And next time in person, even.
Yes, hopefully.
Yeah.
My name is Christine Mungai. I'm a writer, journalist, and the curator of Baraza Media Lab. This conversation was a partnership between Sahifa Journal, Ngala is the co-founder of Sahifa, Bookbank, Wanjiru is the co-founder of Bookbank, and Baraza Media Lab, of which I am the curator. Asanteni sana.
Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. I am excited to be back. Of course, I'm not Christine. I'm Washuka. We've been able to gather both Wanjiru and Kiprop to return for this conversation. Thank you so much to both of you for returning, and thank you for participating in the conversation to begin with. We're going to take a number of questions now, and we have about, I believe, 15 minutes to do that. And as people prep those, I'm going to go ahead and ask you guys a question. What is your favorite memory of Binavanga? And this is to both of you. And you're both on mute. Come back.
We're thinking.
You're thinking.
It must be, mine has got to be this evening we spent at Crave restaurant, which used to be actually not too far from where we are now, just around the corner in Lavington somewhere. And we sat in the garden with Binyavanga and Shiba and myself, and we talked for hours about writing, about the things we'd read, about the things we'd love. And I hadn't read most of the things that Binyavanga had read because he read the canon and I didn't at the time. But I know that it was just after he'd gotten appointed to Bard College. And I was just like, oh, now I have an in. Can I have an in? And he was like, nope, you're going to apply like everybody else. You're going to qualify like everybody else. And you're going to do the thing like everybody else. And I think it's just the richness of his generosity with information, with links, but knowing Binyavanga didn't mean that you were exempt from doing the work of becoming a writer. And there's some things he said to me in that evening that I still hold dear to me today. Yeah, so Crave is always a special place. What about you, Kiprop?
Two memories come to mind. I remember one time I was with him in a pub somewhere. It must have been Johannesburg. And just as we were talking, he spoke to me about how he hadn't figured his life out in his 20s. And it was only when his 30s, when he won the Caine Prize, that his career began to shift. And it was so reassuring because it wasn't a question that I specifically asked, but it's a question that was in my mind, and he kind of just figured it out and told me that things happen when they happen. The second memory is visiting him in hospital. in his last days, and reading to him his essay, How to Write About This Place, and also telling him thank you for all the work that he did for us. So I'm happy I got the chance to tell him that when he was still alive.
And Washka, that picture you have behind you is I think a really grand Binya moment as well. That's such a special TED Talk. I don't know if any TED Talk I have seen has as much character as that one. I love the way it was framed with a letter to his father. Yeah, so that one right there behind you is one that I hold dear as well.
I'm going to grab it and show it to everyone. This is Binavanga at TEDx Houston in London. I can't quite remember what year it was, but it was a very special talk that he gave. TEDx Houston is organized by Ike Anya, I believe, one of his really good friends from Nigeria. Kiprop, welcome back. And just to remind everyone in the room, you can use the Q&A button to share any questions that you may have. I know we've got half the panel back, but yeah, Wanjiru and Kiprop are available for the next 10 minutes or so to take any questions about this panel. And then you can also ask us questions online. You can share information about this session. It was recorded, so it's going to be available on Bookbank's, actually already up on Bookbank's Facebook page, and it's going up on our YouTube page as well. So share away, and if you want to come back and listen to it again, of course you can do that. I don't seem to have any questions for you, at least not from the room so far. So I'll go ahead and ask you guys questions since you have the time to take them. It was very interesting, both of you. Okay, I'm not gonna ask a question. Someone's asking a question. What is one Binavanga reference that has lived with you years on?
That's an easy one.
Memory or phrase or piece of writing.
I think it has to be the one that I referenced in the conversation about freeing our imaginations and just what that does, not just for your work as a writer, but just for your lived life in a city like Nairobi, where you really have to imagine different and you really have to want different. So it's a whole series of talks. I think there are 7 talks or 6 called We Must Free Our Imaginations. And if you haven't seen them and you're wondering what I'm on about, please just, the YouTube has got you the most beautiful and expansive ways another way to explore Binyavanga, because once you begin to question everything, like I said, then you begin to see others, right? I feel like we live our lives kind of hitting against walls. You back up and you hit the wall again. You back up and you run harder and you hit the wall again. But sometimes it's important to just take a step back and look around and see if there's any ways around the same wall. And that's what freeing imagination does. You begin to imagine friendships that you would never have had, or ways of being that may not have been presented to you if you're looking at just the thing that the syllabus tells you to do. So that set of videos and that ethos, that idea to just dare to experiment is definitely one of my mantras.
Sure, like Wanjiru, that's really good about taking a step back and looking around when you're just hitting against the walls. Because just to segue from that, I remember the series of videos that Binavanga did with Jim Chuchu, and they're available on YouTube. I think they're about 6 videos, and it's about freeing your imagination. And one specific line that still resonates with me, and which I think I can only paraphrase, is where he says, the colonialists came and they were like, let all the obedient children come so that they can become clerks and administrators. And everybody who was disobedient, who were like the actual custodians of Africa's or Kenya's or your ethnic communities, were punished and made invisible. So that really sticks with me. It's that, like, you don't need to follow the rules because the rules were not exactly fashioned for your success.
Good one.
I should say as an African or a Kenyan, but yeah, that still sticks with me. And obviously go to YouTube and check it out because he obviously articulates it better than I can even try.
And I think since we're talking about series that he released in YouTube in that period, there's also the series of conversations between him and Dirie Osman, which is quite good as well. So check that out on YouTube if you haven't yet. We have a question for you, Wanjiru. How do you think Binavanga would reflect on the topic of Kenyan politics and tribalism as touched on in your book?
Wow. Yeah, one of my biggest sad bits that Binya never got to read the book, because he definitely heard me talk about it a lot. At least I spoke to him about it a lot. I don't know. I really don't know how to answer that. I think that he already did speak about these things when he was with us. They were alive in his writing. They were alive in the things that, and anytime he spoke, I don't think, or my reading of how to write about Africa, I really thought it was for us. I know that it's really tailored at the CNNs of the world, but if you read it and read it as somebody giving you instructions about how we view ourselves, I think that's something that he was already doing, and speaking about the way we view ourselves politically and tribally and all of those things. So I don't know what he would have thought about my book, but I think that he, and the topics that my book covers, but I know that he was already speaking about these things. Even if, as we discussed on the call, sometime on the recording, sometimes his views were not always popular, but they were his, and he shared them. But I do, and when we meet again in the next life, I'll make sure I have a copy of my book and I'll give it to him and ask him, what do you think?
We'll be ready for that. And actually on that topic, Kiprop, I think the last time I was present for a conversation between the two of you, between you and Binavanga, it must have been around the time of the Kwani Manuscript Prize. I think so. Memories are all jumbled up. But at the time, I think you were speaking to him about the piece that you were working on. I'm curious about how that's gone and what kind of writing is bringing you joy at the moment.
And thank you for coming to my rescue on that day, Angela. Like, conversations with Binavanga were never easy. It was really I remember you tapping in and kind of telling everybody, let's relax now. Let's just enjoy the evening, because you could really see that I was tense. I was just trying to bring the best out of me. And obviously, he was a kind man, but yeah, you know Binyavanga. So I'm writing. I don't want to say so much about my writing now, till when it's ready to be shared. But the kind of work that I was doing then, what I began then with Binyavanga, is still what I'm working on. So it's still very much in my hands. I'm doing the best I can to bring it out in its best form. So good news very, very soon. So let's just wait. I don't want to speak and like let the magic disappear. I'm very superstitious, but yes.
No, keep the magic.
We will wait. We're eagerly waiting.
Marion Bango is asking if you see, and I think this was in relation also to the conversation. There was a conversation that we had at the beginning of this year. So just context for you, Kiprop, that Ngala Chome, who was on the panel, was involved in with you, Shiro. And we were talking about academia versus kind of popular fiction, and how books end up on the set list, on the curriculum, and how that choice is made. And there's a question that's related to that here from Marion and Bango, asking, do you see at any point the academic world incorporating people like Binavanga's writing into teaching literature at universities and at school?
And I guess she means here, because I know that there's schools that I have personally taught Binyavanga's book at first years of literature in South Africa. So it's just here where we're struggling to do the thing. And I think that that's one of the things that I want to see happen before I leave this world. And I don't know if it will, but I know that whatever I can do to help it, if it means writing the books or lobbying the people that be, or all of these things, I think that there's such an important thing that needs to happen. And I think that there's people who want it to happen as well, and myself included. I know, Washuka, you care very strongly about this as well. So it may take time and lobbying, because work is work and work takes time. But I truly believe that it's possible, because I'm one of the people who is intent on building the kind of world that I want to live in. It's the reason why we do the work with Bookbank, because we think libraries are important, but we don't want to wait for someone else to see the importance and then invest in them. So the same applies to writing that should be on the curriculum. And I think until that happens, it's important for those who can afford to buy the books, or people who can't afford to buy them, do so. If you read a book and you love it, then buy a bunch of the books and take them to the library, or ask the libraries, what books do you want? What books do you think are important? And have them sit there. Because that's how the change happens. That's how people begin to also know what's out there, so you can advocate for it to end up in the curriculum. I have had this question a lot about my own work. Like, when can we get this on the curriculum? And that's not a question and the writer should be asked. But I'll write the book. I'll write all the books if you want them on the curriculum. But in this case, I'm also happy to do the work if I can, to get them on there and to sign whatever petitions and to lobby whatever governments need to be lobbied.
Any thoughts on that, Kiprop?
Not so familiar with academia, but definitely yes. Like, we need to integrate these stories and everything that we do outside academia to our institutions. It only makes it more robust, and it only creates more conversations. So by all means, I want to see that happening in my lifetime. So Wanjiru, I'm definitely supporting you all the way.
I'll come to you to sign the petition.
Fantastic. I think thank you so much to both of you, especially for coming back and having this discussion with us. If it's all right with everyone, I think we can wrap. We have another session coming up at 5:30. It's our last event at NBO LitFest. It's going to be super, super exciting. So please make sure that you come back for that. It's part of what we're calling Music Bank, which is a set of acoustic sets recorded at the Eastlands Library. So please do come back. We are jamming with Tetushani. Asanteni sana to all our panelists, both of you who are here today, Kiprop and Wanjiru, as well as in absentia, Dr. Ngala Chome and Christine Mungai from Baraza Media Lab. Truly, truly appreciated, and thank you for having this conversation with us. And a big special shout out to Sahifa Jano for conceptualizing this conversation and for coming to Bookbank with the idea that we should have this as part of NBO LitFest. It was our joy and pleasure. And thank you to our funders who are helping us make this possible. Sharjah World Book Capital, we've got the Netherlands Embassy in Nairobi, and the Sigrid Rousing Trust in London. Asanteni, see you back at 5:30. Bye.